Here on Saipan, you and I cannot own land. And you and I, as people who are not of Northern Marianas descent, we can only lease it for 55 years. That's because there is a constitution that governs law and life here on Saipan, and Article 12 of that constitution limits land ownership or interest in real property to people of Northern Marianas descent. So that brings up an interesting question that often comes up during life here, is whether Article 12 should be repealed, and should it be allowed that people who are not of Northern Marianas descent can actually purchase and sell property. Second, let me know, do you think that Article 12 should be repealed and everyone should be able to purchase land, or should it stay the way it is? Now, there are people who believe that restricting land ownership to people of Northern Marianas descent is limiting investment on the island. There are people who believe that if a hotel or some other conglomerate wanted to really put money into the Saipan economy, that the fact that they can't own the land free and clear is a deterrent to that activity. And there are other people who believe that it's not. It has not been. The Hyatt has been here. The Nico Hotel has been here. The question, though, is that people sometimes tend not to ask is what happens if Article 12 is repealed. And one of the ultimate consequences of repealing Article 12 is that ultimately, maybe over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, ultimately the government would be forced to impose property taxes. So right now on Saipan, there's no sales tax, there's no property tax, there are no parking meters. That means that the sources of revenue for the government are limited in that regard. So where you live, if you live on the mainland, if you live in Hawaii or Guam, land is a commodity. All right. It is something that has value that can be assessed and officially evaluated. Whereas here on Saipan, land is more of a cultural asset, meaning it's passed as part of the cultural heritage from families to one generation to the next. And even though you and I may recognize value in it, and though people can speculate as to the value, and people can offer $1 million to lease beachfront property, there is no official valuation that goes on, because it's not a commodity. In Guam and in the mainland, it's a commodity that can be traded on an open market, whereas here on Saipan, it's a restricted market because the land can only be sold from one NMD to another NMD, person of Northern Marianas descent. However, if you now allow foreigners to purchase the property, you've now changed the basic structure of land here, and you've now made it a commodity that will now respond to the open market, and prices are absolutely going to go up, and people will sell their property in order to make a lot of money. But then what will then tend to happen is that people will develop the land, and there may become more of a strain on the infrastructure of the island. Now, in the past, when those demands came about, the government didn't really have an incentive nor the means to finance those infrastructure improvements. So that would be incumbent on the the person leasing it, or the local landowner to fix up the land or to the surrounding roads or that sort of thing. However, and one other thing that's really important is that banks, because there's no set way of valuing the land that's recognized across industries, like in the banking industry, banks would not give loans, would rarely give loans. There are certain circumstances where that could happen, but banks, you couldn't use your land as collateral for a loan, because the bank let's say you default on a loan on the mainland, the bank can then seize the land um, and sell it, to make back their money for the loan that you defaulted. But here, the bank cannot do that because the bank is not of Northern Marianas descent. So the bank cannot have a legal interest in the property, whether it's a lien or reselling it, nor can they sell it to someone who's not of Northern Marianas descent. So the banks don't get involved with that. But once you now make it part of the open market, banks can get involved, loans can be issued, the prices go up, and a couple of things start to happen. The infrastructure demands may increase, will likely increase, and then the government has now the incentive and the means to generate money to support that infrastructure or to improve the infrastructure. And where does that money come from? That money would come from imposing property taxes on the local land. They can do that because now the local land can be assessed in a recognizable way to say that it has X value. The banks will recognize it, and therefore the banks can say, okay, this property has X value that may change over time, but we know we have a benchmark for what the land is worth, and the government can now impose property taxes. And once that happens, that's when the issue becomes a little dire, because if you think about it now, the average or every landowner on Saipan does not have to worry about property taxes. They can get up in the morning, they can live off their land, they can go to bed at night, never have to worry about property taxes. They own it, they can pass it on to their children, to their heirs, to assign it to anyone they want, as long as it's of Northern Marianas, the person is of Northern Marianas descent. They never have to worry. However, if tomorrow they're required to pay property tax, and if now the banks can seize the government through the banks can seize the property for failure to pay those property taxes, then you're going to have people who are displaced off their land. And that happened in Guam, that happens in Hawaii. So that is the issue that many people don't think long term about, is that the people who are now do not have the financial means to pay property tax. If property tax becomes a thing, then they are either going to sell their land, move into an apartment somewhere, or they're going to lose their land. It's going to be taken. So you'll get displacement of the local population, and you'll have more rich people and more foreigners and investors and conglomerates owning the land. And then the entire personality of the island will change. So whereas Saipan represents a paradise for you now to come here and get an apartment for $300, $400, $500, rent an entire house for $500, that would no longer be the case, because property taxes and everything else is going to raise the standard of living. So this little getaway in the middle of the Pacific that you're thinking of escaping to will no longer be the paradise in that regard, in terms of its affordability that it currently is. All right. So that's a long discussion, but wanted to let you know about that. Now, I never knew this before I came to Saipan. I wasn't aware, but for me, I was not interested in buying property. I wasn't interested in being of a nomad. My nomad proclivities precluded me from investigating the real estate situation here. But for me, it hasn't been a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker. For businesses over the years since the island opened up in the 70s, it hasn't been a deal breaker. As one fellow said to me, if you can't make a profit on your business in 55 years, then maybe you should reconsider your business plan. But that's something to really consider, and it's a discussion that you'll probably get into if and when you move to Saipan in terms the Article 12 situation.